Hello, I'm the Miami Autism Dad, Victor Antunes, the Inclusive My Realtor, and this is the Autism Podcast at Miami's Community Newspapers. Today I'm with Glider Gonzalez Jr., Vice President of Golden Horizon Academy. Glider, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I gotta say, you're the only Glider I know in Miami or otherwise, so that's an interesting name. So where's that name from?
So I only know two, which is my dad and I. So I'm actually Glider Gonzalez Jr. My dad is senior. There's a very long backstory to it. I'll make it short. My grandpa said that he went to Germany after being in Cuba for some time, and he met a priest, and the priest was a very honorable person, and his name was Glider. Nobody has any proof of this whatsoever. It's just anecdotal, but it's a unique name. I'm proud to have it.
That's a good story too.
Yeah, it's definitely an icebreaker, my name. And people always check twice, like, what was it that? And I'm like, oh, it's like Glade the spray, but with an ER at the end. So
Right on. So Golden Horizon Academy, you guys are out in Cutler Bay. When was the school founded?
So we initially purchased another school. It was called La Scuola. They have another campus. I think it's in Sunset. But we bought it late 2019, early 2020. So worst possible time to start a school in modern day.
Any business.
Yeah, it was quite a hard time, starting off. We bought the school with only 4 students. Initially, our name was Montessori Regio of Cutler Bay. We had taken on a team at that point because my background is actually from behavior analysis, is actually where we started. We started in 2016, another company that did ABA services. And we had these 2 people come to us that had been lifelong educators, and they offered for us to run the behavioral aspect of a school. And we were also part investors in the project. But after a few months, we noticed that they really didn't know as much as they had presented themselves to know. So now we were left with this school and this responsibility to these kids that we had. At this time, it was still very few students, but we also didn't know much about education. So we ended up separating from them and taking it on ourselves, and then started hiring people that were better informed, that were more education focused, because these people were more administrative and not so educational. And I mean, to me, the most important thing in a school is always going to be the academics, right? So we hired the right people. We slowly started growing, and now we are at max capacity. So we've
How many kids?
So we currently have around 74 students.
Well, that's a good sized school. Yeah.
So it's only 7 classrooms. So our average classroom size is between 11 to 13 students. Obviously, the more intensive classrooms, the lower functioning kids, there's less per classroom because they obviously need more specialized care. So it needs more external people to be in a classroom. So our classroom sizes vary based on functioning.
And are you K through 8, K through 12?
So we are currently a K through 8.
Okay.
A lot of parents have requested that we open a high school. But obviously, like with how things are right now and education and all the change to the grants and everything, and being a private business, it is very hard to start a high school. But we have tons of requests for it. But yeah, currently we're K through 8.
Okay. And so when you refer to yourself, are you an autism school, or are you a school that accommodates autism? How do you speak about that?
So I always say that we're autism specialized.
Okay.
We do have kids with other diagnoses, like Down syndrome, but we do cater mostly to the autistic community.
Okay. Now let me ask you a question. When families like first walk through your front doors, what kind of expectations or baggage are they bringing with them?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. For sure, these parents, I mean, every parent and every family group is unique, right? And a lot of parents carry with them frustrations from previous schools that they've interacted with, that their children are either bullied or segregated or kind of like picked on in a way. There's other parents that they're just frustrated from maybe lack of information, not feeling like they have the right tools nor like a right support team to help them with the progress of their child. So I mean, parents come in more times than not frustrated. It's very few parents that come in and they're joyous and happy to see the school, or they're looking for a transition from like moving there. You know what I mean? Most parents are coming from either like a terrible situation they had at a prior school or a public school. So most of these parents come predisposed to not like the school.
So can you share a moment or a family, no names of course, that kind of captures that moment?
I mean, it's hard, right? We have at least 3 to 4 walkthrough tours on a weekly basis. But we have that they're currently enrolled, but we had a single mom of 3 kids, all 3 kids on the spectrum. And she obviously came in, she didn't have much hopes. She's a lower income mom as well, so we had to accommodate her financially. But when she first came to the school, she was telling us about all the horror stories of all the schools they had been in, including Catholic programs, which I mean are now getting more invested in the autism space, but it's usually been like not really up their alley. And she kind of came in and she said from the moment she walked in, the energy in the place was just entirely different. The way that she saw the kids interacting and playing with one another, and she fell in love with the school, and they've been at the school now for over 3 years.
Okay, now let's talk about the financial part, because that's like the elephant in the room, especially for a single mom, which I got to say, like my wife and I were together, thank God, but I can only imagine how tough it must be for a single mom raising 3 kids on the spectrum. Now, you said that you accommodated her financially, but parents also get grant money or scholarship money. Like, how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so usually the grants, depending on what their matrix score is, you get the matrix score through the IEP most times. Depending on their matrix score, their scholarship for a 253 is usually around $9,000 to $10,000.
What's a 253?
It's just the matrix score. So there's a 252, 253. It's pretty much the higher the score, the more support they need in a school setting. So the more support they need, obviously, the higher the scholarship. So for example, if you have a nonverbal child and you have an IEP, they give you a higher matrix score, which also gives you a higher scholarship. So kids with a 253 could see upwards of like a $25,000 scholarship in comparison to a 252, which will give you a $10,000 scholarship.
And how do you turn people away, or how do you accommodate them financially? It's got to be tough, especially for a mom with 3 kids.
It's hard. We do it really on a case by case basis. So I mean, obviously, if the family has the means to pay, that's always our first. So when we started, our tuition was $14,600 around those lines, which is very affordable for a special needs program, especially specialized how we are. The cost of running a special needs program is significantly greater than it is someone in a public school or like a regular school program, mostly because we have to have better trained staff and more staff, right, to be able to handle the interventions sometimes that we have to do with these kids. But we have started a program where we're raising the tuition 10% annually till 2030, mostly to offset the cost of all the staff, like I said, that we do have to have there. But it is on a case-by-case basis in the sense that when a family comes and they really like the school and they have, for example, the $10,000 from the scholarship, but they can't pay much else, we'll see either through donations from nonprofits that do donations academically, and or we'll just waive it depending on how deeply the parent is invested, right? And that's one of the things we really take into account is how invested is the parent really in their child's progress, because we've noticed that if a parent isn't really invested in their child and they're just looking for somewhere that takes their kids off their hands, so to speak, for an extended period of time, we see that the progress in those kids are not as substantial as in the kids that parents are invested in their day in, day out, and they're insistent and they're asking questions. So yeah, it's on a case-by-case basis, but we do offer financial help for those that need it.
Yeah, like the parent engagement, that's for like typical kids also, obviously. So when parents come in, how are you evaluating them? And then let's say they're not a very engaged parent. What do you do to accommodate that child?
So it's very hard to assess the parent up front. So we do have an observation for the child in which after the initial walking tour that the parents would do, they would bring their child in for an observation and they would sit with our principal and a behavior analyst, and they'll kind of just run them through tasks, see how the kid reacts, how they interact with certain things, and then we'll see if we are the right fit or not for the child. To gauge the parents, we only really have the walking tour and whatever time they spend waiting for their child's observation. So we don't have a whole lot of time. We'll usually just give everybody that's interested and willing to join the school a 1-year opportunity to join. And then after the first year, now we have a larger study sample to see how invested is this parent. Usually then we'll have a sit-down conversation with them at some point about this. If we don't feel like they're invested enough, we don't feel like they are, because even their involvement in the school, right? Like my mom was the type of mom that was in PTA. She was at all our field trips, on our field days, and all the events she could participate, she was. And I feel like that really shaped me into seeing that was kind of the norm for parents, when in reality it's not. So we have to see that level of engagement as well. You know what I mean? Us in our school, we have several shows during the school year in terms of like performances and singing and dancing. And there's a lot of parents that don't even bother to come, right? And we take note of this. One thing is that employed 9 to 5 and you can't make it, but you would like to. And we also stream it live. So like even your involvement as watching it live and leaving comments, you know what I mean? Supportive comments, just being involved is really what we look for. And if we see parents that are failing to be involved, failing to respond whenever we send them notice, or like unwilling, because sometimes we even have parents, because some parents we accommodate financially, but others we don't, and we have parents that they don't even start open communication about whether they could pay it or not, so they just start falling behind on their payments, and then it becomes a process of us chasing after them. And I mean, these are all things we take into account. We almost never turn a child away based on their behaviors, so it's mostly from parent investment, because we notice that, I mean, at the end of the day, we don't care about prestige, right? We're not doing this for, oh, our school graduates X amount of kids or statistics like that. We do it because we care deeply about these kids. So it breaks our hearts to see a child. And I mean, in the school, you see the worst and the best of all these kids. So a lot of times you feel that attachment to them, and then you feel so deeply for them. And at some point it feels like you feel almost deeper for them than their own parents. And that's just an unadvantageous situation for these kids. So that's usually when we start turning parents away, is when we notice that type of trend where they're not being invested in their own child.
Okay. Now let me ask you, going back to the test scores, 252, 253, who gives these scores?
So, I mean, I don't know that process too well, because private schools are not allowed to do IEPs. But usually when kids transfer in from public schools, they would have had a 504 plan or an IEP done by somebody in the county, and they're the ones that set that matrix score. I do know, however, that parents can request to sit with a committee to adjust their kid's score if they see that they haven't seen progress, or the kid has lost some certain attributes, or they've regressed in certain fashions. They sometimes give you a higher matrix score, which is great, because even if you have leftover funds, and a lot of parents don't know this, if our tuition, for example, is $14,000 and you have a $25,000 scholarship, not only could you cover the entirety of the school tuition, but you could also use the remainder of those funds for other programs like echinotherapy or music therapy or any other program with those funds. So it's important for parents to stay on top of that and to check that matrix score. And if they don't have one, especially if they're in public schools, go to the county, request an IEP meeting, and see how they can get those as accurate as possible.
Yeah, and the equine therapy, right?
Equine therapy, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a friend. He his boy was in a wheelchair, and because he was born preemie with some issues, and on top of being autistic, and he learned how to walk by doing the equine therapy. So that really works. I mean, for some people anyways.
For some people.
For his boy, it worked like gangbusters. So when parents walk into the door, they're expecting one thing, but you're giving them another. How do you, like, because we're talking about the parents here, how do you bring those together?
I mean, it's mostly communication, right? And that's what it comes down to. If a parent is at least willing to have the conversation with us, then we feel like they're trying, right? But if they're being avoidant, if they're still in denial, some of these parents, even if they have already the diagnosis, they come in denial. They don't want to have open conversations. And I mean, we have a lot of knowledge. You know what I mean? We've been working now for 5 years, and we've had several professionals come through our business, and we have had hundreds of kids now to observe and see them grow and see how different they grow based on different attributes. So I can't express enough how important it is to have these parents invested. And I mean, the way to bridge that gap a lot of the times is just having conversation with them, and we'll schedule them to come in. And a lot of times it turns into a vent session, you know what I mean? Because a lot of these parents also don't have a place where they could open up about how they feel, the hardships they're feeling at home, what struggles they're going through. So we lend them an ear to kind of like talk all their problems through, a shoulder to cry on. And I feel like a lot of times after being open and after being vulnerable in that way, they feel more attached to the school and the school's administration, and then they allow us to be more involved in their child's progress.
Yeah, you know, talking about like having a place to vent, I'm part of a dad's group called Just for Dads. It's Autism Dads at UM, and there's also Just for Moms, and there's a lot of groups out there. But I would tell parents that are on the fence, like, those groups are really important, because it's whatever you like your preconceived idea is of these groups, it's not what that is. Like the one that I go to, it's a big round table. We all sit down, all the dads, we'll just bullshit for a little while, we'll have pizza, whatever. And then like one by one, Dr. Michael Alessandri, who facilitates the dad's group. Okay, Victor, got any, anything to talk about? Like, and anything's going on with my kid or my wife or what have you, or with the school. And he'll tell me, okay, call this person, call that person. I'll have somebody call you, and he'll go all around the table. And what's great about these groups is that you hear all these different dads with different stories, and it just puts your story in context, right? Like, I remember one day this new dad, he shows up and he starts talking about his boy and he breaks down crying. And I think to myself, like, my daughter's worse off than your boy, you know? And I even told him, I was like, look, I mean, I'm not trying to like downplay what you're going through because, like, you know, I understand it's tough, but listening to you talk about your boy, my daughter's worse. So it could be better, but it could be worse. And, you know, and talking about worse and putting things in perspective, I've seen dads and parents going through stuff. They're like, oh my God, that's really tough. And having a place to go to where you're around other dads going through exactly what you're going through, it's so important. So do you have any groups like that at your school?
Not specifically. We do have days throughout the year where we have parent-only events that allows the parents to kind of network, and they do go into stories and the funny ones about like funny things their kids do, because even when you have lower functioning kids, they have these moments, you know what I mean? And I observe this in parents. I'm not a parent of any child on the spectrum myself, but I mean, these parents start sharing stories that are just like so unique to the autism community, where it just puts a smile on your face. Obviously, there's the hard times as well, but I feel like the parents, once they do start breaking those barriers of like, because a lot of these parents are still in denial, like I said before, so they're not ready to be vulnerable and express themselves, and it's not till there are those parents that have been in the community a little longer or at the school a little longer, and they see them expressing themselves or positive stories and negative stories, that then they feel comfortable to start opening up as well. And it's very beautiful to watch how like one person being vulnerable could, in one room, could have other people just like be affected by that and also feel like they have the right to be vulnerable. But we don't have any groups per se, any support groups. We do recommend they join support groups like the ones you just recommended. But at this time, we don't have any at the school.
Yeah, and if anybody's listening, they want to join Just for Dads, give me a call and I'll set them up. It's a great group of dads, and after you get to know people for a while, it's easier to open up because you have depth with them. Yeah. So let's go back to your website, because on your website you got your mission there. That's a big part of what you're doing there. So what is your mission? So
I'd be lying to you if I knew our mission by memory. But overall, we just want people to realize that at the end of the day, they're still kids, right? And they're individuals at the end of the day. And every individual, no matter if they're on the spectrum or not, have their intricacies, right? And it's about positioning them in a place where their strengths are being highlighted and their weaknesses are being worked on. You know what I mean? And that's kind of like the core of what we do at our school, is that we identify what their strong suits are. We support them. We kind of make them feel supported in whatever their passions are. But at the same time, we highlight their weaknesses and we try to work on them over time, right? It's more gradual, because myself having ADHD, I know hyperfixation. I hyperfixate on things I like, and I try to push away as many things that I don't like as possible. So for a lot of these kids, for example, like folding clothes, right? And it's really hard to get a kid on the spectrum to enjoy folding clothes. But we kind of gamify it, you know what I mean, in a sense that kids now start getting more involved in their life skills. And then parents are very happy when they come home and the kids are recommending like, oh, let me help fold the clothes, and that level of participation. But our mission really is to have these kids as integrated into society as possible. And by that, I don't mean the regular sense of like being socially acceptable. I mean, try to focus on independent living skills. So if at some point, not every child will have that experience, but if at some point the child can be living independently, they've learned the skills to do so.
Yeah, you know, like I'm thinking about my daughter, like with the folding clothes. My daughter could not fold clothes. She's 9 years old. She just turned 9. She's a level 2, you know, non-conversational. And there are some things that she can do, like she can put some toys away, but she can't fold clothes. So, you know, in a classroom of 13 kids?
Yes, I mean the largest classroom.
How do you facilitate a class environment where one kid can fold clothes and one kid can't?
I mean, so we're in the process of building a life skills classroom currently at our school. We designated an entire classroom just so that's the emphasis that we put on that. But it's completely individualized in the sense that we have some students that aren't even able physically to do these types of life skills, mm-hmm. right? So for that child specifically, we won't focus on folding laundry. We'll focus on the ones that they can do, right? Or we'll just give them free time in the life skills space where we'll have several different life skills on, and whichever one they gravitate towards, then that's the one that we'll focus on teaching them. Because if you try to force what they have to learn, we've found over time that you're not going to get as good of a response from them as you could possibly get if you allow them to kind of venture into the space naturally and get a feel for it on their own, and then kind of target whatever they gravitate towards.
Now you talk about life skills. That's a pretty big umbrella. It's like in the context of your school, what does life skills mean?
I mean, life skills to us is anything necessary in order to live your daily life, right? So we teach them things like sorting laundry, folding laundry, buttoning clothes, right? There's kids that don't have the fine motor cortex to button clothes, so we give them practice doing that. We also do washers and dryers. Like, we don't have any running water, but we teach them how to sort clothes before doing a load of laundry. What uses bleach, what you don't use bleach with, what the outcome of using things with bleach that don't require bleach, like stuff like that. We also do, my passion is cooking outside of working with kids on the spectrum. So we teach them a lot of like easy things they can make at home, microwavable foods that they could make, that's pretty simple, like sandwiches and PB&Js and stuff like that. But it also goes into things like socialization or like dining room etiquette, like what's the right way to eat in a dining room. We also, in the space that we're building now, we want to have a little podcast space for them, because a lot of these kids are media dependent in many ways, and a lot of them are so unique that we would love to get their voice out there. And it's not going to be the same host every week. It's kind of going to be depending on what kid feels what way and who wants to participate that week. But we're going to let them choose whatever subject they want to talk about. It's not going to be ran by us. It's going to be entirely child ran. So that's another life skill that we're working on, because we feel like that's such a large part of society nowadays, podcasting and having a good media presence. So that's part of what we do in life skills as well. And in media presence, like what to do and what not to do with media presence, right? Because there's do's and don'ts. But I mean, it's very extensive. Like you said, we do a lot of different things. We even have a mini supermarket where we have both a cashier and a buyer, and then they go through the aisles, they select their items. The cashier has to count or add up the total of all the things, and then they transact with money, and they got to give them change. So we work on things where it's like things that you're going to do in your everyday life, right? If you at some point become independent.
Now you said talking about kids gravitating towards certain things. Are you saying these kids gravitate more to one than to another?
Oh no. All these kids are
all over the place.
Individuals, right? And that's something I put emphasis on every time I have a conversation. I'm gonna give you an example with one of our own students. He knows the birthday and death dates and the number of each president of the United States. That is
amazing.
You can't ask me what the fourth president of the United States is, and I would not know what to tell you. But he knows every single name, what number they were, if they had multiple terms, their birthday and death date, which I think is a crazy thing, right? So what we recommend to those parents, for example, is if you know he has an interest in history, then put emphasis on history, right? Rather than him going home and absorbing content and media about random things and Roblox and anything, put him in specialized history programs, and or kind of have that conversation with him of goal setting and, all right, would you like to be a historian? Would you like to work at a museum? Like, find something where, in this case, this is a high functioning child, right? Where they could have a job like that, but kind of intertwine the rest of his life around what his passion is, right? We have another child that he thinks he's a ninja, right? And I believe he's a ninja as well. He does some very acrobatic things, you know what I mean? So we have like obstacle courses for him, and even though we don't have the facility for it, we try to do whatever we can to make him feel like he's on American Ninja Warrior or whatever the name of that show is. So I mean, it's very important to find what their passion is, because I mean, those children, even though we have to give them all the other subjects as well, you know, now that they know that they're going to a place that cares for the same things that they care for, they literally run into the school. I feel like I tell everybody that our school, I mean, I'm sure there's other schools like this, but our school is the only one that I've seen where the kids cry to leave. You know what I'm saying? Like, they run from their parents' car into the school, and then they have a hard time transitioning back to home. So
that's great.
We just try to have that environment for the kids.
So nice. Now, going back to the historian, the little boy who's learning about history, it's very important to have an informalized training, because you can learn a lot of history from YouTube. But what I've seen like online is I consider it most likely like infotainment. Like, how true is it? Like, it might be very like captivating, but how true is it? So it's I guess it's okay, but better to have it in a formalized setting where you know they're getting real information. Yeah. Now, going back to like you're saying, you don't force kids to do stuff, but when kids are little, you have to force them to do some things, right? So like, and then ABA, a lot of that is, you sit a kid in front of you and you force them to do. How do you balance the forcing but not forcing? Because you have to force to some level, but you can't force too much. So how do you balance that?
So it's an art, and you definitely have to have tact. You know what I mean? Like, these kids, I'm not saying, I mean, we have very few mathematicians, you know what I mean? We have very few kids that come in and they feel passionately about math. But I mean, math is still essential to everyday life. So, I mean, there's parts where they don't want to do, and that's usually where you see the increase in behaviors or elopement or physical aggression or anything like that. But I mean, we do have ABA integrated into our school. So the kids that do get more aggressive during transitions or during subjects that they're not very fond of, they do have a one-to-one sitting next to them the entire day at school, or however many hours are approved. But that's a whole different subject. But definitely, it's a give and a take. You know what I mean? It's a dance that we do with them where we also set their passion as their reward simultaneously, right? So it's not only like unlimited access to whatever you're passionate about. It's that we also have to do these other things that we don't like as much to earn access to these things that we're really passionate about. So it's a dance. Again, all the kids' academics in our school are individualized, not only per class, but per student and per subject. So just because you might be at a 7th grade math level doesn't mean you have to be at a 7th grade reading level. So we fine tune it down to the subject matter.
Mm-hmm. Now, a big concern for these kids as they, eventually age out of the system is employment. So would you say that the life skills training is a way of early employment training?
I think academics as a whole should be employment training in the sense that a lot of these kids struggle, for example, with things as basic as like taking turns or sharing or anything really. So like if you think about academics, like you could say any career path right now, and it's going to have to do with academic subjects, right? So sure, the life skills is necessary, like buttoning your shirt, right? In most places that you work, you're going to have to know how to button a shirt, and that doesn't sound like it's part of the job, but obviously like if their uniform policy requires you to have a button-up shirt, then having the ability to button your shirt is kind of a prerequisite to working there. I do think for these kids to enter certain careers, I mean, I have very unorthodox perspectives on these things. So I don't always think that a regular high school program is the ideal outcome for most of these kids. We have some kids that, for example, have a 1st grade reading level, but they're extremely passionate about cooking, right? So like they have advanced cooking skills that maybe neither you nor I have, but they are particularly good at that thing. So I think more of a trade school would be a more accurate thing for them to go down. That's going to be more conducive to a better future for them in the long run. Because I mean, how many times a week do you use the Pythagorean theorem, right? Or something along those lines that you learned in high school briefly to pass maybe an AP exam or some sort of exam and then never remembered ever again. You know what I mean? So I feel like academics as a whole try to make us well-rounded, but they fail to make us well-rounded in other subjects that are more important for everyday life. So I think for kids, especially kids on the spectrum, if they have like a certain inclination to do one thing, a parent's focus should be to highlight that as much as possible.
Yeah, and also say about the trades is that as we move forward with artificial intelligence, the trades are going to be the jobs least affected, like cooking in a restaurant. Yeah, you can go to Burger King and you can buy a hamburger that maybe is made by a computer or a robot or whatever. But like a real restaurant, it's going to be a while before that.
I don't think it ever will.
Yeah, it might not ever will.
It never will because, I mean, cooking specifically, right, besides it being a trade, it's something that requires soul, right? And AI, as advanced as you can make it, is never going to have soul, which is the one thing that separates us from the machines. And I mean, if there's something that autistic kids have in excess, it's soul. And that's what drives us so much to these kids in this population, is that they're so authentic. You know what I mean? They're authentically themselves. They have good days, they have bad days. But on their good days, man, I will choose an autistic child over a neurotypical child every day of the week for those good days, because they're so passionate about everything. Like I've hardly had a conversation with someone that's been as invested in a subject as someone on the spectrum. You know what I mean? Whatever it could be, right? Because, I mean, nowadays you'll see neurotypical people that are collecting Pokemon cards, right? But you'll never see somebody as trained in Pokemon cards as an autistic individual that chose for that to be their hyperfixation. So, I mean, yeah, it's just such a great population to be around, and it's really such a great time. And it's kind of what drives us to do our work, because it's just so rewarding in that sense, just seeing their development and how invested they are on certain things.
Yeah, and, and the authenticity is fun. I'll give you an example. I go to Burlington Coat Factory, and there's this one young guy there that I think he's on the spectrum just because of the way he behaves. And one day I'm walking to the store, and I open the door for a lady, and she walks in, and then this young autistic guy, he yells out in the store, "Oh, what a gentleman." And
That's so
if
funny.
I didn't know who he was, I would have been like, is he making fun of me?
Is it
But-
sarcastic?
Yeah, but I knew who he was, and it was really like so raw and authentic and funny because he was like, you know, like he was being honest, like what a gentleman. And it was just like, so like, it was a funny moment that he did that, you know? And so, yeah, they bring a lot of just like fun that a regular person could not do.
They don't have the filters that
There's the
society
filters.
society has placed on us, right? The masks that we always have to wear. And masking is a term really associated with autism, but I mean, I feel like we all mask, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, yeah, of course.
certain people are around, we have to be selective about what we do, but kids, there's no way to train that in autistic individuals. You know what I mean? It's just something that they won't understand, and maybe it's from their failure to understand social cues and stuff like that. But we don't even address that in the school, right? There's certain things where you can and can't do. You can't cuss in public. You should be selective about how you do certain things. You know what I mean? Like, you got to keep your hands to yourselves. Like those safety things we do, but like things that are authentic, like we don't try to limit hand flapping and stuff like that. Like stimming, like that's not our focus as a school, because I mean, we stim at times. You know what I mean? Like right now you're fiddling the pen, and that doesn't make you autistic, but there's people that see somebody hand flap and they're like, oh wow, that's so taboo. Well, what's any different hand flapping from clicking a pen or shaking your knee, which we all do whenever we're nervous.
Yeah.
We all fidget in one way or another. So what makes one more valid than the other? So things like that we don't really focus on, and that's what we mean by we allow kids to be individuals. What we try to focus on is what's going to give them the best possible outcome in the long run.
Yeah, you know, I think of like my own daughter with the stimming is in public, I'll try to like limit it a little bit, like Chloe, and she'll stop a little bit because I don't know if it's so good to have everybody staring at the kid. But at home, whatever she wants, and in the car, she'll sing, she'll verbalize, she'll echolalia, whatever. We never shut her down because that might be her path to becoming fully verbal when she's older.
Of course.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you about your students going back to 2020. That was 6 years ago. Have any of those kids graduated your school yet, or are they?
So no, those 4 original students, probably by the second year had already left. I feel like they were invested in what the program was before we got there, and we came with a whole different flow of things in year 2. So, but we have had graduates, and what we have seen from the very small sample we've had around 3 graduates, is that the transition from our school to these new schools that they're in, they shine, you know what I mean? And a lot of them do come back to visit because they request to come back and visit. And the first thing they tell us is, I'm doing fine, I'm getting good grades, but there's no school like GHA. If I could come back to this school 1,000 times, I will. You know what I mean? And it's unfortunate because a lot of times they're going into public schools, right? And a lot of these kids have been able to transition to regular programs, not individualized programs. And they're just not fond of how academics are handled in a public school setting.
No.
And it's mostly because there's no creativity, there's no fun, you know what I mean? And education, at the end of the day, as structured as it has to be, it also has to be entertaining, because if not, you're not going to captivate these kids. You're not going to get them invested if it's pragmatic, if it's read this to take this quiz, if it's structured like that, you're not really going to get the most investment from these kids. So yeah, we've gotten really good feedback both from parents and from the students themselves. And I mean, parents really try to keep them in GHA as long as possible. We even have some kids that are even 18 years old, and the parents choose to have them still in 8th grade just so they could have a little bit more time in GHA, which, again, that's not what we suggest. We always try to suggest a transition into a regular school program to see how the kid would develop from that point forward. At least till we do have our high school program, then that would be something else. But at the time being, we don't recommend parents do that, but that's just to show how invested the parents and the students are in our current program.
Yeah, you know, I went to a private grade school and then to public school, and it was like night and day, the experience. And I think that what happened with the public schools is that it's too much of a factory setting. And then the class size is like, you've got 11 to 13. Public school, we'd have like 30-something kids in there, which is like 3 times the amount of kids. It's like, I don't care how good the teacher is. It's like 3 times as many kids. What can you do?
I tip my hat to those teachers that when I was a kid had 30, 35 student classrooms and still remembered everybody's names and still knew a little something about each student. That takes a certain level of skill, which, I mean, not a lot of educators possess still, I would say.
Yeah. So I think that what's going to have to happen with the public schools is a reformation, let's say. is you can't, the factory setting, parents, if you have the option of 11 to 13 or 33, that's pretty easy math. I'm going to go 11 to 13. This is how I'm going to do it.
Of course.
Now, so it'll be fun to see, like, as your kids graduate and maybe from your school and then graduate high school, if you stay in touch with them, like how their lives progress.
Yeah, it's definitely something we look forward to. We have kids that when we got, they were very behaviorally disturbed is how I would put it. I mean, a lot of these kids, specifically one I have in mind, he came from a household where it was a very non-functional household. You know what I mean? Like, parents had issues, eventually divorced. Like, it was just definitely not a good environment for this child to be in. So, like, he would behave entirely different at the school than he would at home, because obviously the home was the environment where it would trigger the most of his behaviors. And at school, sometimes we would get that backlash from whatever happened at the house the day prior. But I mean, we made it a point to sit with him, talk him through whatever he was going through. We were our own versions of like school counselors. You know what I mean? Like, we obviously aren't a large enough school to have a designated counselor, but like myself or the principal will sit with these kids. And whenever we're seeing they're having a particularly bad day, especially if they're the more verbal students, we'll set them aside. We'll take them into the office. And I mean, for us, the principal office isn't a bad thing. So it's not like in a regular program where you're like, I'm going to send you to the principal's office. Kids look forward to going to the principal's office in our school, because more times than not, it comes with affection, it comes with rewards, it comes with conversation, a place where you could open up, right? So they look forward to going to the principal's office in our school, which I think is a funny twist. But yeah, we try to lend them an open ear, and a lot of these kids, they open up to you because they have nobody else to confide in, right? Especially if they come from a home dynamic that's so broken, they don't really have anybody else to open up to. So for those kids in those specific instances, which is, I would not say is the majority of our population at the school, but the few kids that do have circumstances like that, we try to accommodate them as much as possible and make them feel like they're loved. You know what I mean? Because a lot of these kids at some point in their household, especially if it's a household that has other kids that might not be special needs, those kids will sometimes get more attention, and they'll just throw the special needs child an iPad and set them aside, right? So we try to be as affectionate with them as possible, not let them know that they're loved, that they're appreciated, and just kind of like understand that they're valuable in their own way, right? So yeah, we definitely look forward to hearing from them, because we get so invested in every single student. Whenever we hear that one of our students is moving out of the state because it's become too expensive, or any circumstance like that, which nowadays is super prevalent, it breaks our heart a little bit, right? Because we develop this connection with them and we get used to seeing them on a daily basis. So, I mean, we all cry in our graduations when we have 1 or 2 graduates. This year, I think we have 4 graduates, which is going to be our biggest graduating class up to date. So we get really emotional. It's definitely, we reflect back to all the years they were with us, how much they've progressed. And it's funny watching all these kids shape into the small adults that they'll someday be.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you say that some people are moving out of the state of Florida because it's too expensive, and Florida is expensive. I'm in real estate, and the average home price is over $500,000.
It's crazy.
The average first-time homeowner is in their 40s. Like, that's insanity. But here's what's interesting, though, is that I have met parents that have moved from other states to Dade County because of the plethora of services that we have. Like, I met this one guy, I think it was Minnesota or Michigan, one of the M states. He's came from a town with 6,000 people. He's like, there was nothing. Nothing. Yeah. And then in Dade County, there's just a ton of stuff. Like, there's during the school hours, after school. So yeah, there is the expensive part. People are moving out because of that. But then again, Florida, and especially Miami-Dade County, I think is a kind of a magnet for special needs families because of all the services that they have here. Now, you know, going back to services. So you guys are doing you're doing ABA, OT, speech.
So we used to, when we first opened, we provide our own ABA, at least initially. In recent times, there's been certain changes to insurances, so we've had to open up to a couple of other agencies, but they're still handpicked because we're very particular about what we allow into the school. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why we really enjoyed having both the ABA and the academics integrated initially was that since we controlled pretty much all the ABA, we had no outside providers, it was very easy for us to hold people accountable, right? Sometimes in schools, especially if we were to open up and everybody were to come with their own ABA agencies, it becomes very difficult to then at that point have to address with each individual agency, like, look, this person is doing this other RBT is being on their phone, this other RBT has their back turned to the client. But when we had that integration that we handled all the ABA in the school, it was our best outcomes because immediately we would address it with a person. There was no middle person that we had to go through in order to reprimand this person or call their attention. So yeah, we started with ABA, and then we also started with the speech and OT and PT. back when we first started. But it becomes very hard to coordinate the logistics of it, especially because a lot of these parents work 9 to 5s, like I said. And if we had a child, for example, that would receive ABA during school day, let's say 8:30 to 2:30, and then they would receive speech afterwards, right? One speech therapist would have to see several clients during the day. So then they would have a gap of like 1 hour to 2 hours before they could leave in the evening bus at 6 p.m. So for some kids, it's not a big problem because some kids are more higher functioning and they could kind of like sit quietly and do whatever they have to do homework, do like regular tasks. But there are some kids that were more behaviorally aggressive that we couldn't have them on a 1 to 2 hour gap, especially waiting for transportation. And the cases where parents could come and pick up the children, it was different, right? Because you would finish your therapy, immediately your parent would pick you up. We didn't have that. So having to hire staff just to watch the gaps, it ended up falling on the school when I didn't think really it was the school's responsibility because we were outsourcing the OT, PT, and speech. So over time, we realized that it wasn't possible. What we do help parents with specifically if they do receive ABA at the school is that we'll coordinate transportation from the school to whatever therapy center they're going to receive the other therapies at. So that's a convenience we give these parents. But in providing
so ABA is in-house, you're saying?
ABA is still in-house.
Okay.
The only ones that we've not allowed anymore are OT, speech, and PT. And we also don't like the action of allowing outside people to come into the school because of frequent interruptions, right? Like if you allow parents to have their way, they interrupt the child's academic day in the middle of their day to receive 30 minutes of speech, right? Which these parents don't really get into the mindset of thinking like the flow of things, right? It takes us all morning to kind of get these kids invested and interested in whatever they're learning about to then have like a 30-minute interruption to then try to transition them back into the class. It becomes very difficult. So we've stopped including that. Not saying that in the future we won't consider it again, but at least in the time being, we're just ABA specific for now.
Now, I'm seeing a trend towards more and more schools and therapy centers bringing in third-party contractors, and you're not doing that. Now, let me ask you a question. Would you say that that's a red flag or not necessarily, or it could be?
In what sense?
But if I'm a parent evaluating your school, there's 2 schools, school A and school B. This one does in-house like you do. This one contracts. Would that necessarily be a red flag or not?
It really comes down to, I mean, it's a case-by-case basis, right? So you can outsource it and it still be good, right? But it really depends on how many people do they have in the program that's monitoring how good or bad these outside contractors are doing, right? So the advantage of having it in-house is that we are observing them constantly and consistently, right? So when we see somebody that's not doing what they're supposed to do, we go and address it specifically to them and immediately. If you're outsourcing, like I said, it becomes more complicated and there's more moving pieces. And especially if it's a small boutique school, as they'd categorize our school, it's very hard if you don't have the personnel or the administration to be supervising these individual practitioners. It's going to be a lot more lax. And I mean, the best example I could set for this, back when we first started that we had our own ABA, we provided 99% of all the ABA in the school, but there was one child that we did not accept their insurance. So we allowed them to come in with outside insurance. And that RBT was the least functioning RBT of the entire school. And she had one of the hardest clients in terms of aggressive behaviors, elopement, and other things. So it made it hard for us to reprimand her and or call her attention because it's no longer our position, right? The ones that hire or fire her is an outside company. So, I mean, in that sense, it's not a red flag, but it is a hurdle that another school would have to have if they were outsourcing this therapy.
Okay. Now, let's go to your music and performances at Golden Horizon. Tell me about that.
I mean, I would say like we have a very music-oriented program. Not that we force it on the kids, but we do notice that a lot of these kids do like singing. They like playing instruments. It's just a form of like emotional expression they use where like, I mean, I've just seen a random drum set and sometimes I've released my frustration on it, you know what I mean? So it's very conducive to having them express themselves in a very positive fashion. So we do have 3 shows during the year. We have the end of the year show, which is usually in December. And sometimes winter themed, sometimes it's whatever the kids choose, you know what I mean? We make it a very open process. The kids have a lot of say into what happens, into what doesn't happen. And then we also have a Valentine's show, which is both, it's like half runway, half singing and dancing. And then this year we combined it with what we call our art bazaar, where all the kids, the work that they've done up to this point, because we do it usually in February around Valentine's Day, they kind of like pile up their art they've been doing during the year, and then we allow friends, family, and all sorts of people to come into the school and then purchase the art directly from the kids, and all the proceeds goes to them directly. So we usually recommend cash only, and then it's really funny watching these kids haggle with their tias and tios and random parents, right? Because sometimes parents feel moved by another child's artwork, not necessarily their child's. Mm-hmm. And it's funny watching them haggle and be like, the sticker price is 10, but they're like, I'll give it to you for 8, last minute deal. And then they'll be haggling in that sense, and it's really amusing to watch. That's our second show, I would say. And then our biggest show is the end of the year extravaganza. We call it the GHA extravaganza. And it's our longest show. It's roughly an hour, which obviously having all these kids learn these dances, learn these songs, performing for an hour, it's definitely a feat, right? So I'm gonna be honest, I don't cry very often, but I cry every extravaganza because it's so moving to watch all the work they put in. You know what I mean? Like, we have weekly practices, and the classes go and they practice their dances and they practice their songs, and it's just so moving to watch, like, what we're able to do even with the lower functioning intensive classroom that I'm telling you about. Just like watching the kids like smile on stage, and kids that would usually be like separated in another school program are here in front of like their parents and in front of their loved ones, and they're dancing and they're performing to the best of their ability, right? Not all kids have the same talent, but just watching them get out there and being exposed to that, it's just so rewarding. But yeah, we have 3 shows. We're very, very music specific. We have a few instruments that we focus on, particularly the drums. We have one child that really likes playing the bass guitar. We have another child that plays the regular guitar. So we kind of accommodate them wherever we can. There's some kids that play the piano, so we accommodate them with a piano. But it's definitely a very moving show. I definitely will invite you to the next one.
Do that, yeah. So I am seeing more and more music programs at these schools. It's super important. And I think of my own daughter, whenever there's a performance at school, you go watch these kids and they're just having the time of their life. And then I think back to myself when I was in my private grade school, music and singing was a big part of it. And even for the typical kids, it's a lot of fun and it's very social. So I'm sure you're seeing a lot of kids come out of their bubbles socially. Yes, would you say it's pretty accurate?
They do become more social for sure. I mean, one of the few memories I have from my childhood academics would be like playing the recorder in the 4th grade. You know what I mean? So that just goes to show that like us as humans as a whole, we're very musically inclined, right? So there's something just like instinctive about the aspect of music where it really draws out another side of these kids. So they do socialize. It is funny. They'll call each other out when they hear one out of tune or like wanna. So like the fact that they have no filters makes it a very funny environment to watch.
Interactive.
Oh yeah. So like it'd be funny watching them call each other out, but then like they're still friends at the end of the day, so they'll go out immediately after that and play together. So it is definitely, there's a social aspect to it. And yeah, I would highly recommend any parent that hasn't sought out any sort of music program for the kid on the spectrum, I would definitely recommend that they do check one out.
For sure. Now, there was a question I wanted to ask when we were talking about the parents is you're going to have different levels of parents that are involved, right? And I'm sure some are coachable. Like I think of myself, like I'm very coachable. At least I'll listen to you. I might ignore you, but I'll listen to you and it won't hurt my feelings. And But I'm sure you got some parents you can't even tell them anything. Now, have you seen parents come in and unintentionally undermine their kids' progress?
All the time. I mean, the biggest thing I see with these parents is the use of technology, right? Although we do have computers in the classrooms for the kids to use, and we use it on some activities, we don't recommend to parents to give unlimited access to devices, right? And a lot of these kids will hear anecdotally either from the therapist that's worked at home or from the child themselves that they go home and they're just on their device all day, right? So that's something that we kind of try to coach parents through. The hardest road is usually the most conducive to the best outcomes, right? So by that, I mean, like, if you want to be in shape, you got to go to the gym. And the same thing goes for these kids. It's definitely easier to give them a device and not have to worry about them when they get home, but it's also not going to be conducive to the outcomes that these parents want, right? So more times than not, they're not doing as much social interactions as they should be doing with their children because they find it hard to, right? Or like they'll try to integrate them into the dining table with the rest of the family, and then the child would start having behaviors. So in order for the rest of the family to continue their dinner, they'll give them an iPad, or they'll seat them separately. Like, you have to go through those tantrums. You have to work on it consistently. You have to be there day in, day out for you to really see the outcome that you're trying to see, right? Having the intentions that you're going to sit them at the dinner table the first time and they're going to immediately integrate to the family is an unrealistic expectation of them, right? So it requires hard work. It requires you being present. It requires you in some way being proficient in how to handle behaviors, identifying the function of behaviors, which is something that we really put focus on with the parents. I don't know if anybody's expanded on that here in this podcast before, but there's 4 functions of behavior, and it's either escape, tangible, so it's attention, escape, tangible, and then sensory. The sensory one being the hardest one, like hand flapping, where like there's not really anything you could do to avoid that. I mean, you could try to like limit it in public and stuff like that. But I mean, access to reinforcers like tangibles, right? Like their iPad, for example. A lot of behaviors will happen because they want the iPad and you're not going to give them access to it. So it scales, right? Other kids, it's for attention. People think like, oh, but how could it be for attention if I'm reprimanding them? Well, reprimanding is still a form of attention, right? So if you are failing to give your child what they expect to be a sufficient amount of attention, then they're going to behave out of line or do behaviors to attract even negative attention, so to speak, in the terms of reprimanding. So, I mean, these parents, the best advice I could give them is put in the work now, because the older they get, the harder it gets, right? So if there's specific things you would want to see from your child, you have to swallow that hard pill and start putting in the work.
Well, you can give me some guidance on that one, because like with my kids, what we have done is that in the car, no electronics. So that's because if it's never been that way, that's easy to maintain. At when we're eating, there's no iPad at the table. But other than that, both my kids have got full access to their iPads. And my neurotypical boy, he'll play with other toys. But my daughter, she's on her pad. If she's not eating or in the car, she's on her iPad. And my wife's on board. She knows that that's not the best thing, but I can't get her to take the pad away and have our daughter go through the tantrums. So how do you coach that?
It's hard. And I mean, that's really where ABA comes into play, right? So like us as a school, we're kind of limited as to what we could teach these parents. We could tell them in overall strokes, like you should do this, you should do that. But for the specifics of how to deal with tantrums, that's where ABA professionals come in. Specifically, the behavior analysts, they have what's called parent trainings. A lot of these parents don't take the parent training seriously, or they avoid them. They reschedule for later dates. And I mean, to me, besides the therapy that goes on a day-to-day basis with the RBTs and these kids, the parent training is probably the second most important thing, because it's the opportunity for the parents like yourselves to be like, okay, I know that we're trying to limit access to iPads. When I take it away, this happens. How would you mitigate that? How would you work on that? And I mean, I could give you some general advice, but myself, I'm not an analyst, right? If you were to take away the iPad, you have to have a secondary thing for her to do that is going to maybe not be as fulfilling as the iPad, but it's still pleasant, right? And that's what's called like shaping. Like her preferred activity is the iPad, but you know that you don't want her to have access to that. You have to have secondary things that are still reinforces to her that she could use that aren't necessarily the iPad itself. And with behaviors, it depends what the magnitude and what the behavior itself looks like in terms of tantrum.
It'd be a tantrum.
I mean, yeah, but tantrums, there's tantrums of different magnitudes.
Oh, that's true.
Right? There's just like screaming and crying, and then there's like physical aggression in terms of like hitting you, open hands, closed hands. There's property destruction, like they'll literally go around the house and start throwing things or breaking your TV. Like before I worked at the school, I was an RBT for 3 years, and I had a 13-year-old client. He was 240 pounds. And he had a single mother and a grandmother that were raising him. So like for me to tell them what they had to do was very hypocritical, because I mean, I wasn't worried about him hitting me. It was part of my job. But obviously being a mother and a grandmother, it's much harder to force him to do certain things because of his size, right? Or like he would have got a hold of the TV, and if they didn't give him what he wanted, he would throw the TV to the ground, right? So while I was present, you wouldn't see those things because I would stand in front of him and I would stop him from doing those things. But some moms aren't going to have the same capacity. And that's why I'm saying like, the right time to have addressed that in him was when he was 5, 4, 3 years old. The earlier the intervention, the better always, right? Any professional in the field can tell you the earlier the intervention, the more ideal. But I mean, at that size, it was hard to get him to learn new things.
What was the age again?
He was 13, 240 pounds.
He's already made.
He's already made. He was nonverbal. And his communication, I integrated an AAC way later on. He would talk briefly with the AAC, but it wasn't like lengthy conversations. I made strides with him in the sense that when I first went to that house, they were spoon feeding him, reclined on the couch watching a movie, and I got him to sit independently at the table and eat with his own hand.
You went to the house?
I would go to the house, yeah. Okay. And I got him to eat on his own accord and eat with a spoon and fork. So like his family would now start having family dinners, which is something they would have never imagined being able to do. Obviously, he was so progressed at this point that later on, a few years later, after I stopped working with this case, I found out that they put him in like an assisted living facility, because it gets to a hand that, and I know that's very hard for parents sometimes, having to feel that like, oh man, I feel like I have nothing left, right? And like, is this the wrong thing I'm doing by putting them in an assisted living facility? But in reality, when a child has that magnitude of behavior where they're being dangerous to themselves, to others, to like their surroundings, sometimes parents don't have a choice. You know what I mean? Because could you envision yourself living with this child till he's 45, 50 years old, or however long you're going to last, right? Whenever you pass away, he's not going to have any choice but to go to an ALF, right? So it's definitely a hard decision. I didn't blame the mom at all for it. I understood, because I worked with that case day in, day out for 2 years. So I understood the hardships she was going through, and it wasn't easy, especially with a lack of a father figure that could have more or less driven him to do certain things. It was going to be very hard for that mom. So I don't blame her at all that she had to make that decision. I mean, she still goes to see him, right? It's not that like you leave him there to rot. Like, she's very active and seeing him every weekend, or she'll go and have dinner with him 3 times a week. So she's very present still in the child's life. It's just in a different way.
Yeah, I'll give you an extreme example that happened about 2 years ago. It was this young man, 17 years old, 6'6", 300 pounds. Maybe you know about this one. He attacked his teacher, and there's a video of it. And, you know, it's a good video. You can see what's happening. He was going to kill this teacher if he wasn't pulled off. And he goes to court. I think he got like 2 years. And the mom's like weeping in court. She's like, you just gave my boy a death sentence, which it may have been. I don't know. And I remember that there was also a video of the police. They come to arrest him. And it was grown men like our size.
And they were struggling.
And they had him in handcuffs already.
Okay.
But they came to his shoulders. And they're like, you're going to be a good boy, right? Like, you could tell in their voices, they were concerned that if this 6'6", 300-pound mountain went crazy on them, even handcuffed, that was going to be a bad day for those cops. So for these parents, like that mom saying that this is a death sentence, and I'm not like convicting her of anything, but I am saying that maybe if he had been moved to a facility earlier, because, you know, when you're that big and that aggressive, you literally, like, you can't just be like, get a hand slapping. Something has to happen. Maybe prison wasn't the best thing for this boy, but it's all they had at the time.
I mean, even if it wouldn't be a prison, it'd be a psych ward. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the thing that these parents don't understand. Like, sure, in an ALF, you're isolating them in a way. Maybe you're even medicating to make sure they're not being as aggressive as they were in your household. But if you just leave them out into the world, right? Like, if they do one of these things in public, they could possibly kill someone depending on the size or the magnitude of whatever behavior they're doing. And at that point, even
it's life.
It's life. You know what I mean? And so at some point, it seems selfish, right? And that's what like parents had, especially invested parents, right? Like parents that might not be as active as I've said, like other parents that pretty much like segregate their kids and they really don't pay attention to them. It's not that big of a leap, but for a parent that's been day in, day out for 13, 14, 15 years of their child's life, it might feel like the selfish thing to do. But I definitely think in the long run, that's what's in the child's best interest, because like you're saying, like it's life, right? At that point, if they do something, or for example, like a lot of these kids, they could steal a car, right? And while you're sleeping, or they could open doors, right? Because although they might be nonverbal, that doesn't mean they don't observe as to how things are done, right? So like, even I would be worried if I had a child like that they would elope in the middle of the night, or they would get hit by a bus, right? Like they leave in the middle of the night and they go and they get hit by a car. Like, how do you justify that at that point, right? So a lot of the times, although it doesn't seem like the right thing to do, I feel like facilities like those exist for a reason. And sometimes it's the ideal thing for certain kids.
Yeah, especially for the single moms, which to me,
specifically for the single moms, yeah.
In this community, the single moms are the superheroes.
I agree.
Because, you know, when you like with my daughter, she's 9 years old, she's getting bigger, a little more physical. I can control her very easily. And her whole life, I'll be able to control her. But if it's just my wife, my daughter's almost as tall as my wife right now, and very little, she'll be bigger than my wife. And, you know, and we're getting older and she's getting stronger. So, you know, having me as a man, I can control her, but my wife, maybe can't. And then that's a girl. What if she was a boy?
Yeah, it becomes much harder.
Yeah. And like me, I'm like 190. I'm a pretty big guy, but 240, 300 pounds when they're in their teens, that's when they're at their strongest. Yeah. So I would tell moms that there should be like, you're going to feel terrible. Obviously it's your baby, but sometimes
even handling them is hard. You know what I mean? Like, what's the right way to withhold a child or a young adult at this point from being physically aggressive or injuring themselves, right? Like, you have to use some form of restraint, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is taboo, and you shouldn't restrain kids or you shouldn't restrain your children. But at the same time, like, if they have a knife or if they're armed or if any of these things, like, you have to take these actions, right? And these are actions that I feel like weigh a lot on parents, you know what I mean? And it's interactions that for some families, it's not just a possibility, it's a reality. And it's happening on a daily basis where they're having to live those interactions. And in those cases, I mean, that's what I'm saying. A home is the ideal situation because they're going to have access to the reinforcers they like on a full day basis. Maybe they're a little medicated and maybe they're a little sedated, but at the same time, no one's having to go through those interactions that you have to go through on a daily basis to have those interventions with these kids because it's traumatizing. You know what I mean? Like, as an RBT, I remember instances where I would go home after work and before I could drive off, I would just cry for like 30 minutes in my car, right? Because I would have had such like an intensive interaction with one of these clients, or you had been consistently making progress, and from one day to the next, they just regressed all those months of progress you've done, right? And like, I got chills now just talking about it. It was probably one of the hardest days of my life, and it's not even my child, right? So you have to add on the added emotion of you've been raising this child now for 13 years, and you're observing this firsthand. I could only imagine what that mom was going through. You know what I mean? So hats off to single moms in this community for sure. It's very hard to do so. But for the parents that do have the ability to, early intervention is key. You know what I mean? Because it's much easier to shape kids at 3, 4, 5 years old than it is at 13.
Yeah.
Right? We currently have a 13-year-old at the school. I think he's 13. He might be younger. He is 6'3", right? And thank God he is not aggressive as of right now, because if he were to be aggressive, we might have to remove him from the school. Because, I mean, we just don't have the staff, nor would we like to expose the other 11 kids in his classroom to potentially being hurt by a 6'3" individual. You know what I mean? Like, autistic or not, it's a risk that we're not willing to take. Luckily, we're able to manage him in some way now. He's nonverbal. He has self-injury behavior, so he does injure himself. And the family has found strategies to kind of keep him at bay, but it's nothing that's going to be a long-term solution. Mm-hmm. Like, this child likes breaking remote controls. I don't know, it's very particular, but they buy him 2 remote controls a day. That gets expensive. I don't know if you've ever bought one of those universal controls.
But they could buy like throwaways or something, or go to
you go to the dollar store and you try, right? But even the dollar store now is $125. So if you're buying 2 a day in a matter, it's quite a
times 365.
It becomes expensive.
It's all plus, plus, plus.
So there's instances where, like, I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, but there's instances where it's necessary.
Right. Well, glad this has been a great conversation. I'm glad we're talking about these aggressive young men, because we don't have this conversation enough. And I think that parents carry a lot of guilt, and it's good to like get this out there so people know that they're not alone.
Definitely not alone.
So I've got 5 last questions I want to ask you as we wrap it up. First question is, what has leading Golden Horizon Academy taught you about children that you didn't understand earlier in your career?
Children are inherently innocent. Right. And a lot of times when you see them doing something that they're not supposed to do, it's usually a learned behavior. Right. So having them in the school has been a process of detoxification for a lot of these kids, where they come from an environment where they're absorbing a lot of negative things, and they come and they project that at the school. And we kind of have to reprogram to understand that that doesn't have to be their reality. Right. And for the more verbal kids, that's easier to do because you could have it through conversation. But then other kids that are less verbal, you have to do it through physical interactions and teaching them that love exists in certain environments and they're deserving of it. And kids are individuals. All kids are individuals. You know what I mean? Be them special needs or not, all kids have an identity. And I feel like it's our responsibility, both as a school or a parents in this case, to identify what their identity is and try to accommodate them to their reality as much as possible.
Yeah. And I'll say this about kids. When you come from a fairly normal background, it's hard to imagine that there are kids that come from homes that are completely broken with no love and just completely dysfunctional. And yeah, you're going to just have to work with these kids and meet them where they're at.
It's hard. It's definitely hard. I would say it's the harder part of our job, right? Because I mean, behaviors and stuff like that, like most kids have behaviors, you know what I mean? Like, I have a neurotypical nephew that I've seen have 1 or 2 tantrums in my time, you know what I mean? So the behaviors aren't the problem. The problem more times than not is the environment at home and how receptive the parents are to whatever feedback you could give them to try to amend that in the best interest of the child.
Yeah. Okay. So second question, when you think about the students who struggle the most at first, what separates the ones who eventually thrive from the ones who plateau?
I've been saying it all talk. It's the parents' involvement. You know what I mean?
That's the X factor.
That's the X factor at the end of the day. We could do whatever we can. We could try to, like I said, focus on their strengths and work on their weaknesses. But the X factor is, how does whatever we're teaching them at school carry on home, right? If it stops at the door, every day we're forced to reteach them with the same thing that we taught them the day prior.
Yeah.
But if there's consistency and there's communication between the parental unit, the family, and the educators and the ABA, if they have ABA, the better the communication is amongst all the parties, the better the outcome is going to be in the long run for the child.
That's great. Okay. Third question. What do you wish more educators outside the special education world truly understood about neurodiverse learners?
That's a tough question. I mean, yeah, it's been the theme of the conversation. They're all individuals, you know what I mean? And you can't expect them to learn the same way you learned or a neurotypical person learns, right? Like, we go to school because we know we have to go to school, because you have to get a high school diploma, because you have to have a career, but they don't see life in those strokes. You know what I mean? Like, an autistic child isn't thinking about, not all, there's some that do, but most autistic children aren't thinking about like what they want to do 10 years from now, right? They're in the moment, they're in their own space, in their own sensory space as well. So, I mean, sometimes you have to go down to wherever they're at to kind of connect with them before you could impose for them to learn anything, right? So I think connection is very important in education. You have to make them understand that you see them, you understand them, that you value them, but that they still have to learn, right? So it's about having tact and being stern but respectful. And also, there's moments where you're going to have to understand that they have better days than others. And on those harder days, you can't escalate alongside with them. A lot of things that we've seen, and I know there was a case, I think it was in Gulfstream Elementary a few years ago, where one of the students had a tantrum and physically hit their music teacher. And I think the music teacher striked them back. And that's just unacceptable. You know what I mean? So like, if you see a kid is having a particularly hard day, try to lower the demands on that particular day. That's not to say that if they're having bad days consistently, that you're consistently going to lower the amount of demands. But if you know that they're usually at a specific standard and today they're having a particularly hard day, make that an easier day for them, and then tomorrow retry. You know what I mean? You can't always try to impose yourself or whatever curriculum you're trying to teach them that specific day.
You know, as a dad of a neurodiverse child, I'm going to like maybe push back on the hitting part, and I'll tell you why. If you've got like the 13-year-old boy who's 240 pounds and he hits you, maybe you have to hit him back in self-defense. So I think that sometimes some of the problems that we see with these educators is that they're not trained. And if you're not trained, a 240-pound boy hits me, I'm going to hit him back because I'm thinking this kid's going to kill me. So maybe sometimes we're putting educators who aren't really trained in situations that they shouldn't be in. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. I completely agree, and I think it's valid. And I'm not advocating for or against a parent hitting their child. That's not what I'm saying.
I'm saying self-defense, though.
No, definitely self-defense. But in this case, for this music teacher, it wasn't a 240-pound 13-year-old.
Okay.
It was a much smaller, much younger child.
Okay.
So, I mean, maybe not striking him back. Maybe you would have to restrain him or hold his arms or position yourself in a way where you could intervene.
But that takes training.
It takes training for sure.
Yeah.
And that's what I was saying. I don't think they're giving enough training to teachers in the public school system about how to appropriately handle these kids. Nor do I think they pay them enough, if I have to be honest, right? Like being an educator is hard enough. When you integrate as well special needs and high intensity behaviors, it becomes even harder, right?
Yes.
So it's at some point it's going to become for a teacher like, is what I'm being paid sufficient? Like maybe you have the passion, but you're not being compensated as appropriately as you should. But definitely I think educators should be better trained in that regard, and I don't think it's up to them. I think it's up to the school school program to teach them how to do those things.
Funding, all that.
Exactly. All that goes back to it. And I mean, every day you see that educational funds are being cut more and more,
Yes.
which makes you think, how is this training going to happen, or how is this? It's not going to happen, right? Which is why schools like my own are more prevalent, especially in the special needs community, because we do have the time and the resources, right? Because I mean, we have to charge tuition. A lot of parents are like, oh, how much do you really like the kids if you're raising your tuition? But it doesn't come down to how much we love the kids. At the end of the day, it's a business, right? And for us to be able to provide these kids with the optimal learning experience, for us to be able to have enough funds to start that high school that everybody's dreamed of, it requires funds, right? And you
got rent to pay, teachers to pay. Yeah, there's no free. Free doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Only in your imagination.
And I would love to compensate my teachers as they deserve to be, right? But I can't do that unless I'm getting the most output I can from the parents. Okay. So I mean, we're not trying to take advantage of anybody. I want parents to know that, like, when we raise the tuition, it's because we're genuinely trying to improve and solidify the program, and the only way to do that is financially.
Of course. Okay. Next question. How do you personally stay encouraged in this work when progress is slow?
I mean, I'm a very particular individual. The school loves me for that specific reason. And when I say the school, I mean the administrators of the school. I'm always happy, right? Even in the worst of days, I'm always positive. I feel like something that kind of drives me, specifically when the kids are having bad days, right? Because, like, for example, yesterday was the whole red moon situation, and I don't know what it is about star alignment and planet alignments.
I believe it's true, man.
I believe it's true.
There, okay?
I do. Whenever we're having a particularly bad day in the school,
look to the stars.
I go to my to one of our assistants, and I'm like, are we in Mercury retrograde? And more times than not, we are in Mercury retrograde, which, I mean, it sounds ridiculous. I'm not really into astrology or anything like that, but I definitely think there's some overlap there. But I think it's really about talking your way through it, right? When you do have a bad day, when you are stressed, when you feel particularly in a disadvantageous position, like, the best way to get through it is feeling support in others. Mm-hmm. And I say that because in our school, like, whenever we do have a chain that, like, we've had a day where several kids have been acting up, several kids have had high intensity behaviors, more times than not, I'm the one that steps into the classroom to interact with them to try to de-escalate it. So, like, when we have had a day where it's been particularly hard, I lean on our principal, I lean on the rest of the people on our staff, and we talk through it, and then we share funny stories about other things that other kids have done, and it kind of balances out. But ultimately, what drives us on a day-to-day basis is those little moments I was telling you about, where you see them be authentically themselves, or, like, maybe even after a high-intensity behavior, like, they'll come later on and they'll hug you and they'll apologize, right? Mm-hmm. And, like, moments like that, and then, like, you look at them and you're like, I didn't really want to intervene there, you know what I mean? But you left me no choice, and they understand, and you guys hug, and it becomes worthwhile, right? It's definitely a difficult job. I wouldn't say to anybody that's looking for a career path that this is the most simple. But in terms of being emotionally rewarding, this job is second to none, in my opinion.
Well, let's talk about rewarding. The last question, like, kind of ties into that. If one of your students were sitting here 10 years from now describing their experience at Golden Horizon, what would you hope they say about how that center shaped them?
I mean, we're already seeing it now. I mean, I would like them to say that we believed in them when nobody else would, right? Or
that's really important, man.
Yes. And that's what I always go to say, like, do I think that child in our school is going to become a ninja for real? I don't think he's going to become a ninja for real, but never in my life would I tell him that. You know what I mean? I'm not going to be the one to shoot down any of these kids' dreams. I'm going to be the ones that's realistic, and I'm going to tell them how they have to move in order to make that dream a reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go.
Right? Because that's all I can do, right? You want to become a ninja, you got to put the work in.
That's right.
You got to be doing pull-ups. You got to be doing the monkey bars. You got to be doing all these physical things, because that's the only way he's going to become a ninja. Now, maybe 5 years down the road, he's still out of school and he goes, you know what, that ninja
too much
thing,
work.
Too much work. I think I want to do plumbing. I'll be like, that's a whole different thing. You know what I'm saying? Definitely better. It's a trade. You're going to do great in that. We're going to help you. So it's about, again, I want them to come and say that we were there when nobody else was, or that we were present even on their worst of days, which is absolutely true. No matter how hard of a day a kid could be having at our school, we're always going to be present, and we're always going to support them no matter what they do to us. Because, I mean, I will tell you, I've gotten my fair share of slaps, kicks, bites, the whole gamut of things. But yeah, I just want them to say that they felt supported during their academic ventures.
That's awesome. Well, Glader, thank you for coming here. This has been a great interview.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad that we talked about the more just, let's say, physical kids on the spectrum, because I don't think that conversation has been had enough. And I don't think they were as honest as we should be around that conversation sometimes. Like that 17-year-old, and we're talking about him, some people were calling him a child. At 17, you're not a child.
Definitely not.
For me, you stop being a child when you turn 13. Then you're a young man. And when you're 17, 6'6", 300 pounds, calling you a child doesn't do anybody any service. Even the kid doesn't do him service, because now you're talking about somebody who physically isn't that, and they need different kinds of supports that you wouldn't give a child. And now you're giving this young man child support, but they don't need child support. They need young man support. So it's, I'm glad we had this conversation.
Yeah, and it's the reality of our field. You know what I mean? Like, everybody talks about either verbal or nonverbal and stuff like that, but behaviors a lot of times becomes the defining factors in a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was blessed enough to have that interaction with this child and see him be put in an assisted living facility, which kind of distorted my life view, right? Because up to that point, I was the same way. I thought like, oh, like who would do that to a child? Like, but at the same time, after living it and being there day in, day out, you realize that, oh no, these parents, these single moms, they're having a hard time, right?
And so it has to be done. And it's the best for everybody.
It has to be done. It has to be done. And I know it's taboo, and that's why it's important to go to these events that you're talking about, or these groups where people are expressing these things. Because if you are being exposed to a parent that has making the decision to do so, you could probe them a little bit. You could see why they did it, what led them to that. And if you find that you relate to that, then maybe it's the right choice for you as well. And it's the hard choice to make, but sometimes it's the right choice.
Yeah, listen, I had this conversation at Firestone. The lady who took care of me, she had to put her boy in an assisted living facility up in Orlando. She goes every weekend to see him, but she had to do it. Yeah, we'll later. Let's turn to the camera and we'll sign off. This has been the Autism Podcast at Miami's Community Newspapers. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.